Start one more time.
You want me to do that again?
Check. Film check. Great. Perfect. All right.
Juvenile delinquents forever. Okay.
I think I'm in the right spot here.
Can you be seen?
Sure.
So,
What's your idea today?
here's the idea. I wanted to talk about the need for intimacy.
The need for intimacy.
Yeah. Which is founded upon the need for a relationship. So I've already recorded something. I would like to just play it, and then we can discuss everything that comes out of it.
Okay.
And it's very clear.
I hope the camera can hear it.
I hope so too. In the human, there is a profound need for intimacy, for a relationship, for connection. We know this. Any reasonable psychologist would tell you that. To be embodied is to be healthy. To be disembodied is to be truly neurotic and psychotic. When they say he's out of his mind, they really should say he's out of his body. Now he's in a world created by the mind, a world of paranoia, fantasies, monsters, and whatever else that can come out of the imagination. But the embodied life is an entirely different thing, and it's quite simple. If it's reduced to its essential elements, it's quite simple. It's reduced to its sentience. And we as sentient beings live very strange lives, as I've said before, like bubbles on the ocean that are alienated from the other bubbles, believing that we're really separate. Alienated from the ocean, not even knowing of the ocean's existence. We have to have any understanding of what it means to be embodied, to be physical. We're made out of energy, we're made out of vibration, we're made out of quantum mechanics. This is our nature, and thus we do away with all kinds of things like human dignity and God and every other thing that we don't understand, but which for some people is so evident that it should not even be disputed, because God is no, it's not the big old man in the sky with the beard. Any intelligent person has thrown that version of God away, but unfortunately that's where many of the godless end their reasoning. They can't think in terms of what Hemmeroff said, which I loved years ago when I heard him say it. Now there's a blog on it, that because of the nature of this quantum life, all kinds of miraculous things can arise. And so, the need for connection is profound, and thus found in the greatest intimacy. And if one is incapable of love, but only receiving love, like the narcissist, then one could never experience intimacy, because one never transcends the self. But when one really loves, the way you love your child and the way you love your pet, when your heart opens up and all you feel is the love, and you don't want anything else in return, if you're really mature, you don't need anything more, because you know that you just love this being. No matter what this being does, there's unconditional love, and it's not just a thought, and the emotion itself is evidence of a physicality. Let's make the body more than what it only appears to be. The body is a vibratory system, and when it loves, it sends out vibration. So the love is a vibration. It lives out there, apart from it. It lives in the other. It lives in the heart of the other. It lives in the care. It lives in every way that you or from or any other person, speaking of love, could serve it. And it's a real thing. It's a truly real thing. And one more. And it's a need. And it's a need. We need to be back there. Huh?
Okay.
So is that running?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Believe so. Yeah. Still going. 4 minutes.
So you want to talk about anything on there, or is it just all boring? You remember Hemmeroff?
Yeah.
I thought back on him a number of times, because he had at one point said that there could be immortality. He implied it when he talked about this being a super system, and it dies, the energy is not dissipated. It simply goes into another dimension.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of thought to that, like, is it Gurdjieffian? Gurdjieff's entire mysticism was dedicated to intensifying and increasing and substantializing the sense of self so that one will continue on
Through embodiment.
through one embodiment after another, but will retain a kind of higher state and go from one state to another and you'll eventually get to a high place. Okay? I mean, it was very numerical. And obviously going towards one would be the ultimate. Do you remember that? Do you remember him talking about the worlds? You're talking about well, see, we're talking about Gurdjieff, but Gurdjieff, but in reference to Hameroff. And Hameroff basically is talking about a never-ending kind of energy that simply shifts.
Right, and that makes, theoretical sense to me. I have no conception of the entirety of the universe. I'm not omnipresent and omnipotent, and what's the other one? Omniscient?
Omniscient.
But it makes sense to me that we are at a certain level of identifying ourselves as aware and sentient, but we cannot see past a certain point, almost in the same way that our eyes can't see past a certain point clearly. It's like we have a certain fraction of reality that we live within, and on both ends of the spectrum, both the macro to the ultimate degree and the micro to the ultimate degree are just we're completely incapable of conceptualizing them except on a theoretical level, because it's just a completely different level of being. But it would make sense to me that we become disembodied the more that we focus on the particulars in the realms that we live within. So we basically lose sight of the forest.
Yeah, you mean because the particulars carry an obligation, and you have to operate on the particulars. You can't just let be.
Yeah.
You have to make be.
Imposing upon reality.
You have to, the homo faber, the man, the maker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There are all these terms.
Right.
And that's one of them. So basically, in order to survive in this world, we have to kind of give up the childlike awe of things and simply function and turn things into functions, into instruments, which is pretty sad when you think of it. So we're not allowed, because of the conditions we're born into, just to be mystics. We'd never be mystics anyway. We'd be profligates. If we didn't have anything to do, if we were all capable, all living like American kids whose parents spoiled them and all that, what would be our destinies? Only some people would go through the filter, and like 20% would find something that they know, wow, I've got to do this, and they're creative and they're good at it. A lot of these others will fall by the wayside. And
okay, it's two things. One, I want to go back to that.
Yeah,
what seems to be a moral obligation that you're discussing, like kind of like a moral obligation to humanity to improve things for the betterment of everyone.
I didn't jump to that conclusion, but you could make a case that would wend its way from what I said to there. If you become aware that you are really very united and unified with these other beings, then you realize that you are your brother's keeper.
Right.
So there's so much to all of this.
Personally, I feel a sense of that at this point in my life, and that's one reason why I'm driven to do what I do, with as much weight as it bears. But other than that, I wanted to say that the model that you're referring to is, if I'm not mistaken, the ceramic model, which Alan Watts brought up in one of his lectures. And it's kind of the model that the Western religions revolves around, which is that there is a constructor and a constructee, and it's the ceramic model is we are within it, but not born from it, right? And so we don't grow from the model of what we look at as the universe.
Well,
we're kind of born into it.
The Western version of the universe is a pretty alienated one. You're right. But go on, yeah.
Well, so the opposite to that was the Eastern way of thinking, which is that you are grown from the universe and that you continue to grow through the universe and you kind of dissipate back into the universe afterwards. if I'm
Their
not
best
mistaken.
thinking would say that.
Right.
You find that many of the people would never live it. They're
Mm.
just as self-absorbed, self-interested,
Right.
self-monstrous as anybody.
But the higher thinking
But their
ones
conditions,
from that,
their
yeah.
conditions don't lead to as many of the unbelievable excesses of Americans.
Mm. Right. That seems to be the good side of the bad
Yeah.
that keeps someone from maybe, to use a proper but profound term, of sinning themselves into hell.
Mm, that's a
Right.
good way to put it.
Right, like kind of like living in narcissism and gluttony and greed, you know, of all kinds, you know, and just never getting any fulfillment from life whatsoever because of the lack of perspective of how, I guess, simple and easy it is compared to living in a hellhole. I don't know.
I think the majority of people, if I can take a guess, the majority of people who do feel a good fulfillment of some kind are family people who learn to love their families.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, everything has to be relinquished, as we know. There's a dark side to all of it in every way. But I don't call it a noble way, but it can be a primer for learning to love more than just oneself. The family is oneself.
Mm-hmm.
The kids are just a projection
It's
of
a
oneself.
projection.
That's why people love them so much.
But it's an identity structure, right? Like you are more connected with blood than not connected
Yes,
with blood.
exactly. I mean, that's
Supposedly.
even my father used to use the term flesh and blood
Mm.
while he was beating Snub.
Mm.
I could just make too many jokes, but go back to your original point about this. There's a dark side. Well, let's talk about the Eastern version of it.
Mm.
Yeah, there is a much more organic version from the East. All kinds of. The West has. You could read about this in people like Fromm and Watts and others. Huxley. So many of them. So many people who speak of, you know, the relationship between the present existential moment and the Tao through Zen Buddhism. I mean, there's so much of this is all interblended. There's so many of these ideas. What I like to do is to go to the very heart of the existential moment, because there you will find the Tao, you will find the Buddhist void, the pure light of the void. You'll find it in the midst of sentience. It's at the foundation of sentience.
So talk about the process of getting into that state. That was what your doctoral dissertation was about, correct?
Actually, my doctoral dissertation was an intellectual analysis of Sartre's version of consciousness, body consciousness.
Mm.
And I found there, I won't try to reiterate it unless I read it from my dissertation, spent 40 years. I found there a place where he has cut off body consciousness from the world. And I found a flaw there. And by opening that flaw, showing that his version of body consciousness had an extra structure that had no business being there, I was able to take the structure away and the entire thing poured through into the void. I'm not joking. Basically, body consciousness unblocked. No traumas, no anything. Unblocked body consciousness, purified body consciousness. No hang-ups, no structures in the brain of anger and resentment, none of that. Where one is simply present physically That's cosmic consciousness. Alan Watts said that how many years ago? 40, 50 years ago to me in one of his books, or more than one of his books. He makes that point that Jesus Christ was cosmic consciousness.
Meaning not disembodied consciousness, but rather completely enveloped in reality.
I don't, that makes it too elaborate.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I don't mean
No,
to.
go ahead.
Say it more simply. Body consciousness completely present to whatever is in the manifest field.
Mm-hmm.
So this room, if I were completely present, undistracted, undivided,
Right.
without all my incredible hang-ups, if I were completely in this room, this would be spectacular to me more. It would be beyond words. Why? Because it would carry a number of things. First of all, it would divest oneself of the fear that is fundamental to living in ego. I know that fear is there because I had an evening when there was no fear. And there was nothing to fear because there was nothing to protect. When you come to realize fully what you are, well, certainly what you are not. What are you not? Everything that you see. You are the consciousness that sees. But what is that made of? It's nothing. It's like not even here. It's just wherever it is at the moment. And it is free. You can't harm it. It would be like trying to cut the air with the sword. It is beyond fear. And if you got to that point, everything would be heaven.
So I want to address a point really quickly that I came across many years ago when you first proposed this to me, and that was probably 16, 17 years ago when you first proposed these ideas to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. That is what you just said, not to say that you wouldn't protect your loving family under conditions by any means, but what it means is that at some point we will all have to confront the end.
Good, go there. Yeah.
And so, what do we do with that? Do we hold on, grasping firmly on our physical attachments and attachments to life, or can we pass through the eye of the needle and leave it behind?
Yeah, there you go.
Right, and leave the absolute essential self to pass through and continue on.
It's the only one that can go through. The rich man has a blessed chance of passing to the gates of heaven, said Jesus, than the camel who to pass through the eye of a needle. Because he's so attached.
Right.
So attached. And then, I mean, basically, Jesus wasn't just talking about giving up your possessions. Eventually, he represents at the highest mystical levels the sacrifice of the self. That's what he was all about.
The polar opposite would be someone that's completely tyrannically trying to impose themselves onto the world.
Like many of the preachers who made millions of dollars in the God business, and they should be ashamed of themselves, but they probably kid themselves that they're actually doing God's work.
Right.
And that they represent. One has 3 or 4 big jet planes, and he was sucking money out of the contributors for another one, because it'll help us fly all over the world and spread the God. Just amazing.
Not exactly the same as Mother Teresa.
Just amazing people, really amazing people. I mean, and they apparently have enough people giving them money so that they live like, lords.
Yeah, of course.
It's a sad thing. What you're really dealing with all the time, no matter what we talk about. Here I am. I know that I'm dumb as a post, but I know that other people, when it comes to this stuff, don't even think about this stuff, or if they try to, they have no language for it, and they've never read anything about it. Most people are not going to be interested in what we discuss, but there will be some people.
Well, it's Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like if you're constantly bombarded with survivalism, I think it's impossible to even start to conceptualize the end other than just the anxiety about not having being anymore.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to complete embodiment, if one were to, say, start a practice of embodiment, like a meditation practice, you said to me a long time ago that you could simply start with feeling yourself sitting in a seat, correct? You could just feel gravity and then focus on your breathing in your center.
Begin near. Like anything you do in art, begin near, right? You know that. That's the key to doing art. People don't realize that. So they, like, you want to write, begin with where you are at the moment.
Right.
Anyway, go on.
Well, so from there, you could spend any amount of time, doesn't really matter, in that state and basically try to further increase your awareness of yourself in the present moment without any thought of the past or future that you're trying to generate. You just remain present.
All right, but now if you're suggesting people do try this, let's add this caveat.
Sure.
You're going to try to stop your thought. You're going to try to be perfectly present, but what's going to happen is you're going to see thought arise like,
Cloud.
remember the old lava lamp?
Yeah.
You couldn't stop, only it's going to go faster.
Right.
Thought will just keep arising and arising, and there will come a time when you will fully realize that you cannot stop it, and there will be a letting go in a certain way, so that no longer is the problem.
Right.
And no longer, see, it's going to be a problem if you do it sincerely for a while, and then when you realize how impossible it is, then you will have those moments of silence.
Right.
You just observe thought arise. It'll be something you identify with, so you're going to practice a kind of discipline not to jump into it emotionally and add more thought to it. Watch it arise and watch it go, and there will be a space after that thought, in between that thought and the next thought.
Right.
And if you look into that, if you're lucky, I don't mean to be unrealistic, but sometimes you can, there's the space between thoughts, you walk into it and you fall deeper into a deeper level. Krishnamurti would say that you could actually do psychoanalysis on yourself, and he's absolutely right. You don't need anybody else to do it. All you really need is to pay close attention to what arises and to not idealize yourself.
And to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, that's hard though. You think back on the
course.
things of your life, the mistakes, etc., and how you may have justified. Don't justify anything, and realize you're just an ordinary organism. A lot of people make themselves into kings and queens, according to John Watson, who was a terrible person, but living at the beginning of the 1900s, and he did say that people think they're kings and queens. You've got to stop idealizing it, and I don't know too many people who can give that up. They're always idealizing. That's ego. That's a form of narcissism that comes out of it in order to just justify its existence, because people don't even believe in their own existence deep down inside.
Right. And I want to enforce some of those points that I've found to be true when I have experienced and played with these ideas. One is what not to do when trying to not idealize oneself is to not go the other route and to browbeat yourself.
There you go.
It's to be completely present in the moment, and there is no space for criticism. And you're right, and bullshit, right?
Yeah.
There's no space for it in there. It's just, you are just in the moment. And I mean, certainly I deal with this when I'm trying to get people that work normal 9-to-5 jobs to lift weights. And I want them to be present, because part of the practice of them not ruining themselves is to understand themselves. Because I can't lift anyone's weights for them. They have to lift the damn weight themselves. And it's a Zen-like practice when you do it correctly. It's a meditative practice where you have to be embodied, which is scary to a lot of people too, because they realize all the mistakes that they've made with their body and how it's deteriorating on them. So it's like they run away from it. But that's where the work is. That's the real work of making progress with that sort of thing. But I was gonna say, what else? An old saying about the effects of a practice like this would be, the usefulness of the cup is in its emptiness. If your mind is filled with cluttered thoughts of idealizing yourself and then trying to put yourself under the microscope and destroy the idealization, and you just create that homunculus effect of layers and layers and layers of
separation
of you looking at yourself. And
we're separated beings, therefore we're capable of living in self-deceit.
Right.
We're separated from the true self, which is a fundamentally sentient self that's awake.
Right.
See, we think of that as like a lower ecstasis because it's not intellectual. I've read some great intellectuals saying that. Not necessarily. You don't stop having great, wonderful thoughts.
Right.
Do you? No, you're coming from a clear place.
Right.
You're coming from a clarity, and thus you have much more opportunity to be objective.
Well, you're. I hope somebody out there is a neural scientist and can chime in on this stuff. But when you clear the way to think straight,
then
your flexible intelligence, it has to improve over time. Your ability to solve an issue that arises, because issues will rise, no doubt, in life, right? Over and over again, there will be problems to solve. But your ability to just go through the suffering without suffering any further must improve over time. You must become more and more capable of handling the stress of life in general. And
well,
just
I wouldn't make the
it.
promise.
Right, sure.
Because I know what a wreck I am. But, okay, but I don't know what I'd be if I had not been involved this way.
Right.
So, I mean, I could be, pushing up daisies for all I know.
Mm-hmm.
But,
well, I'm pretty sure you had a good idea with your brothers.
Well,
same conditions.
You find what's heartbreaking is you find just as much alienation inside the family as outside the family. And maybe that's a good thing in some ways too, because then you realize that Jesus said it, I've come to separate you from your family, which is my way of hearing him say, everybody's your brother and sister.
Mm-hmm.
You are not just located in this little cluster of being.
That identity structure just limited to the family.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, you find the mafia chiefs to love their kids beyond measure, right? But they murder other people in terrible ways.
Right.
And you find this all throughout all the tribes in the world. And there's, again, my grapes of wrath, the room full of human-sized grapes, all cutting and slashing at each other with knives and swords, killing.
But attached to the same stem.
All the same being. It's just one being. It's a cluster of grapes, but it's the human condition, and we are like this. Now, Alan Watts said in a book at the end of Nature, Man, and Woman, he wonderful book about body consciousness, a spectacular book, one of his best, in my opinion, and. At the end, he talked about the separativeness of ego. He talked about ego. And he said it's the result of a certain brain configuration of the human. In other words, I would think he was looking at it as some kind of challenge and it's supposed to be this way, et cetera, et cetera. But he actually goes to another point, in my opinion. He says if it weren't like this, people would have a deeper sense of connection and would not be living on one of these levels, by the way. He didn't say that. Remember I mentioned Gurdjieff?
Right.
Where he talks about different levels. Would you like to go into that?
Sure.
He says that there are levels of existence that are characterized by laws, and the laws are this way. If the number is higher, then the existence is more difficult. And the laws can be laws of physiological nature, biological nature, can be social laws, can be physical laws like gravity, you know what I mean?
Right.
All kinds of, and so he says that we exist at a level of 48 laws, which is a very difficult place. This is a very difficult world. There's a lot of suffering in here. And there are beings that exist at a level of 24, half, and there are beings that exist at a level of 12, half. And beings that exist at a level of 6, and then at a level of 3, and then the final one is no levels, just one with everything. But those last levels they're supposedly not even created. It's not new to him. You find this in the Gnostics as well. They have their hierarchy. We exist at a very low place. 48. This is the next to the last stop on the way down. The last stop is what they call the moon, according to Rajiv. And the moon is characterized by 96 laws, twice. And you can only imagine how difficult it would be to live on a place with 96 laws bearing down on you. How crushed you could be. How difficult it would be to rebound and to start your way coming back up. Supposedly that's their theory of what happens to souls.
Right, I think there's diagrams online of that.
Yeah,
actually.
probably. You know, who knows? I mean, who knows any of this? But
Right.
it's interesting when you realize at least one thing. This world is very difficult. This is a terrible world of suffering. So,
But again, going back to the embodiment, it's when you're completely embodied, you are what would be the right term? You're not suffering so many levels at so many levels.
I think you're probably right.
You're I think if you're talking about those levels of the laws, you're transcending some of the limitations.
Alan Watts made a point in that Nature, Man and Woman. Now, we're going back 40 to 50 years when I read the book, okay? But he talked about someone being beaten and tortured, and the person actually loses the self, where there's just no more person there. There's just the organism that's reacting. The organism is suffering, but it's not the same being. The other one is gone. The ego is gone. Now, I don't know if that's really possible. I put it in one of my books.
Right.
If you remember the terrible scene when Don Luciferio tortures to death some of the killers of his parents in that shrine, and he just bangs them to pieces. And the soldiers around him didn't realize that there were no people left anymore, the ones that were screaming. There was nobody home. I don't fully understand that. But he says that the organism suffers, but it's actually increased in terms of ego that's separate from it. I think that part of that is because suffering implies vulnerability, and vulnerability means death. We are such creatures unto death that we're afraid. If a thing becomes too intense, death beckons, right? If pain becomes too intense, death beckons. There will be a point where a person will say, kill me. Right? Give me the shot of morphine. Anyway, that's, you're brought up Catholic. You just, you're going to have to think about these things because they've been inbred into you. I don't know about you. You were brought up kind of funny. You weren't given was there formal kind of?
Yeah, there's several different.
Yeah, I know
formal
you did a
religious
a
studies.
revivalist thing once with your dad. You were pretty young then, but it wasn't anything that stuck, was it?
No, I think it was too disconnected. The idea of the figurehead in the sky just didn't stick with me ever. I had enough authority, I think, as a kid. I didn't need another one, a bigger one.
Your father gave up on them, at least when he told me this. He saw the way the guy who ran it lived, the car he drove, and
Right.
all that. So he saw that he was just a moneymaker.
Yeah.
I mean, all you got to be is glib. There's lots of people making money on the God business.
Right.
I speak for God.
It's like anything, honestly.
Oh, well, I have a
It's
real
particularly
issue
bad
with
with
somebody
that. Yeah.
who has declared himself self-realized, and he's
Right.
as egoic as he ever has been.
Right.
And people follow him. That's the part that bothers me. That people are so like lemmings.
Mm-hmm.
They they're followed because they need to have somebody who sounds like he knows what he's talking about, even if he's full of it.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
bothers me a great deal. As
So-
I say, there are things I haven't gotten beyond.
Right. Well, that's I constantly bring up Jordan Peterson, but that's actually one thing that I really like about him is he really does not claim to have all the answers. He just says these are the ones that the conclusions that he's come to under a great deal of study and rewriting his own ideas on subjects.
A lot of his stuff is descriptive.
Mm.
He's not even making declarations. He's describing, and
Right.
yes, he's imputing certain dynamics into things. I know that, but he's basically descriptive because what he's doing is loading up his argument with all kinds of references.
Right, like loading up a shotgun.
He's a scholar. I
Right.
know what he says. I'm not an intellectual. I agree. He's not. He's a human being. That's what he is. I like the guy personally. I'm just on his side. I have to, I would be his. Look, let me say it this way. I'll say it for the camera. I sometimes watch people assail him. People who are so much lesser in intellect and self-evaluation and honesty. And sometimes I would like to be his cat's paw.
Yeah.
I would like to be his defender.
Right.
For myself, I wouldn't be able to do it, but I know I've got this crap detector built into my head, and I know what I could do with some of these people. They would deserve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
They're incredibly self-deceitful, right?
Yeah, really. Let me ask you a few questions while you're slashing at that gentleman over there. You don't even understand the guy.
Right.
You don't even understand what he stands for, but you're using him as an instrument. I mean, I can do it from any angle you want.
Well, that's a lot of what he came across with the reporters too.
Yeah.
That's all their task is to create a story. So, but back to the original subject. In closing,
You mean the subject of the need for intimacy?
Intimacy, right.
Mhm.
So that comes from a stance of complete embodiment, I would guess.
Good. That's a good way to put
You can't
it.
truly be intimate without being embodied.
Right, and let's take that into, that comes from the truth. What's
Right.
the truth? The truth is that we are one being. We are one. You go into the woods and you look at moss on the north side. Look at it closely. Get a microscope and you see all these little stamen, right? You're going to see all these little individual growths. That's what that thing is made of. Suppose that they have a revolution in there.
Yeah, the bacteria in our guts. If
I
each
mean-
one knew something.
No, but look at you look
Yeah.
at the moss, the green moss on the
Yeah.
side of the, and if you look closely, it's like a civilization.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
And they obviously don't have the same problem. They don't have the intellect. They don't have the
But-
self-division that we experience. This strange structure of the brain has produced such a funny loop. There's a loop that goes on. Everything that we see carries our own self-interest. There's no such thing as just a perception. There's a judgment. Judgment, when I say judgment, I judge it, that's a camera.
Right.
That's
right,
a judgment.
Right.
Okay?
So it's fundamental.
Right. But then, of course, there are people who judge every damn thing because they're setting themselves up as ideals.
Mhm.
And I had to deal with hundreds of them as teaching, having 5,000 students in front of me in the course of 44 years. And so many other people. I've been watching Dr. Ramani, I think her name is, who is an expert on narcissism. I listened to a number of her talks last night. I didn't even turn on the TV. I just listened to 4 or 5 of her talks, talking about narcissism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's really good stuff.
On YouTube.
Yeah, on
Yeah.
YouTube. Yeah, very good. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't learn anything essentially new, but it was excellent. She's excellent. She does a good job.
Yeah.
We are very strange, as I started out saying in the recording. We're a strange kind of organism. We are dislocated from our true selves. Even the good people who go to church and all the rest, still feel such a great distance. They've been taught that the gulf between the human and God is infinite, and that's true.
Right.
But then you hear those who will lose their souls will gain their souls. What does that mean? That means when you are this upsurge of energy, and when you're about to fall back into the fire, you let go, and then you realize who you really are. There's a depersonalization of the energy of the universe. I think we have to personalize it more. We are made out of that same energy. Carl Sagan used to say it, you're made out of star stuff. He was so dead on, too, wasn't he? He's a good guy. Okay, you can